everyone, this is more of an informational video on inequalities in two triangles, and also included is an example of an indirect proof. So basically it's more about definitions and examples and theorems, and also the Hinge theorem. So here's your vocabulary for indirect proof. An indirect proof uses a temporary assumption that the desired conclusion is false, by then showing that this assumption leads to a logical impossibility. The original statement is proven true by contradiction. So we're going to look at that at the end of the video. And here's our theorems of the Hinge theorem. If two sides of one triangle are congruent to another two sides, for example here, these two sides are congruent, and then these two sides are congruent. All right. And the included angle, so this means the angle that's in between the two congruent sides of the first is larger than the angle of the second. Then the third side of the first is longer than the third side of the second. So the side across from this angle and this angle. So in this case, WX is going to be longer than ST. The other sides are congruent, but the sides are not. The third side is not. And also the converse of the statement. So basically we have two congruent sides. These two sides are congruent, and then these two sides are congruent. And then we're given a side instead. So if this side is smaller, 9 is smaller. So here's your included angles. The included angles mean in between two sides. Then this angle, angle F, measure of angle F is going to be smaller than the measure of angle C. So it just kind of works together like that. All right. So here's an example. Given that AD is congruent to BC, how does angle 1 compare to angle 2? So basically, the first thing we need to know is that these two sides are congruent, and we also need to know that this, if you split these triangles up, this would be the same side. So we do have included angles. These are the included angles. Since this side is bigger, then that means measure 1 is bigger than the smaller side of measure of angle 2. So that's just the Hinge theorem, the converse of it, because we were given the sides instead of the angles. And here's a word problem. It says car A leaves the mall and heads due north for 5 miles. So I guess this is the mall here. Heads due north. Here's your north thing here. Leaves the mall. Here's the mall. So he heads due north for 5 miles. And then turns west for 3 miles. Now car B here leaves the same mall and heads due, so he's right here, and heads due south. So he goes down for 5 miles, then turns 80 degrees right here for 3 miles. Which car is furthest from the mall? So we're looking at this, let's do a different color, this length and this length. The longer the length, the farthest from the mall it is. So basically we got to find, these two angles. We know, first of all, that these two sides are congruent because they're both 5 miles. So we got to find this angle, and that's going to be that's going to be 90 due to the supplementary angle theorem. These two angles form a linear pair, so that's going to be 90. And this one here is going to be 100 degrees. Now, these two sides are congruent. And then we have these included angles that are in between the two sides. So the side across from the 90 is going to be smaller than the side across from the 100. So this one, the one across from the 100 degrees is larger. So it says, which is farthest from the mall? Well, that would be this one right here. That's farthest from the mall because it's the longest segment. All right. Now here's the indirect proof. So basically, here's your 3 steps. Identify the statement you want to prove. Assume that the statement is false by assuming the opposite is true. Then reason logically until you reach a contradiction. And then step 3, point out the desired conclusion must be true, because the contradiction proves the temporary assumption false. And here's your example. So we're given that x is an odd number and prove that x is not divisible by 6. So what we want to do is write an indirect proof by assuming that x is divisible by 6. And the way I'll just write it is x is divisible by 6. And it equals some number n. So you cross multiply, you get x equals 6n. All right, now this is the hard part for some students. Step 2. If x is odd, then by definition, x cannot be divided evenly by 2. So let's see, 7 is odd. It can't make a whole number. That won't be a whole number when you divide. We're talking about whole numbers here as well. All right. So let's do another odd. 11 is an odd number, and it can't be divided by 2. So, however, x equals 6n. So if you divide both of these sides by 2, you get this equals 3n. We know 3n is a whole number, so x can be divided by 2. This contradicts our statement that that x is odd, our given, since we can divide this by 2. So therefore, the assumption that x is divisible by 6, our temporary assumption, is false. Now that proves that x is not divisible by 6. Okay, because 6 is an even number. And that's it. Thank you. Have a nice... Oh, let's do one more. Okay, we got one more here. This is just a little checklist here of what we just talked about. If measure of ABD, so where's ADB? This angle is bigger than CDB. So let's just put this as, what do we want to call this? If this is bigger, so say this is 60 and this is 55. So that means that AB is longer than BC. So AB is longer because the angle is longer. That's by your Hinge theorem. Now, we have another example that we already did with the car. In example 2, car leaves the mall and goes 5 miles due west and then turns 85 degrees. So car 2 instead is 85 degrees here. So instead of 80, it's 85. Car C. Oh, we have a car C. Never mind. So it leaves the mall goes 5 miles due west and turns 85. So we'll just call this car C, and this is 85 miles. It says, write the cars in order from the largest to the closest. So basically, with our first car, car B was 80 degrees. So that made it 100 degrees that went here. Car C, we have 85. So that's going to make the angle 95 degrees. And car A, this is car C, and car A was 90. So basically you just pick the biggest one. Car A is the smallest, so car A is the closest. The next smallest is car C, and then we still have car B. So you're just going by the angles. All right. Suppose you wanted to prove the statement that x plus y does not equal 5 and y equals 2. Then x doesn't equal 3. What temporary assumption can you make to prove the conclusion indirectly? So if you look at it, if y is 2, then x has to be 3. So what we're going to prove that this is false, basically, because x has to be 3, we can prove the conclusion indirectly. So we assume that x equals 3, prove that it equals 3, and then prove that this statement is false. And that's it. Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.